Okay, my name is Bolgar. Actually, I shouldn't be here. I wanted to be a professor of Hungarian literature. I wanted to marry my high school sweetheart and retire in a home inherited from my grandfather. But Hitler came, and here I am talking to you. I was born 84 years ago in a small town in Hungary. Population 13,000, amongst them 1,100 Jews. We live peacefully. My father fought in the First World War, was wounded, decorated, and later on he became one of the executives of the local veterans organization. He had a small store. He helped my mother, and my sister was 6 years younger than I was. I started my education in a nursery school. There was only one nursery school in a small town, run by the nuns. There where I went, so first prayer I learned were Catholic prayers. Then for 4 years I went to a Jewish school. And again, when it came to high school, it was a Catholic high school. But it was the only one. So Protestants, Catholic, Jews, we all went there. Those days, religion was a compulsory subject. So when it came to religious studies, a reverend, a rabbi, a priest came. We went into different classrooms. When it was finished, we were together again. That lasted until Hitler came to power in 1933. Now, the Hungarian government joined to Hitler because both of them, the Hungarians and the Germans, lost the First World War, and Hungary actually lost 2/3 of its territories. So Hitler promised, I'll get it back for you. But you have to do something about the Jews. At the beginning, the Hungarian government was reluctant because the Jews was important in the economy. But Hitler was pushing, so in 1938, the first anti-Jewish law came. It was mostly economical. Every large Jewish company had to have a non-Jewish partner. All Jews were fired from government positions. But there was no choice, we learned to live with it. But Hitler was pushing further. So other laws came, 1939, 40, 41. Ended up that mixed marriages were forbidden. Jews couldn't have a non-Jewish servants. And the Jewish merchants couldn't get any merchandise which was controlled by the government, like salt, sugar, tobacco, alcohol. But again, there was no choice. We just tried to learn with it, live with it. In 1941, Hitler invaded the Soviet Union. So the Hungarian government joined. They called up the men from 20 to 48, including the Jewish men. But by then, they didn't accept them as soldiers. They wouldn't give them a uniform. All they had is a yellow armband. And they were used to kind of forced labor, clearing forests, repairing roads. Also, they were used clearing minefields without any detectors or equipment. So by the end of the war, more than 75% of these men died. Now, at the beginning, Hitler was victorious. He occupied most of Europe, North Africa, and so on. But he made the big mistake, tried to invade the Soviet Union. There was a decisive battle, Stalingrad, I don't know if you heard about it, where the German army was defeated. From then on, it was a retreat. So Hungarian government saw that they are losing the war, tried to sue for peace. The Germans found out, and they came to occupy Hungary. They occupied Hungary March 19, 1944. The first thing they did, every Jew had to put on a yellow star. We had a curfew from 5 p.m. till 8 a.m. They took away all the phones, radios, vehicles, whatever we had. We weren't allowed to leave our hometown, and in the bigger towns we weren't allowed to use public transport. But that didn't last long either. One Sunday morning, a Hungarian gendarme and a German soldier came and gave us 30 minutes, pack whatever you can carry, and they took us to the yard of the Jewish public school, where they confiscated all the jewelry, including watches and wedding rings. We spent the night there. The following morning, they took us to a railroad siding, and with a train, they took us to the next town, which was somewhat bigger. By then, they established a ghetto there. The ghetto was simply that they emptied the worst part of town. Actually, they pushed out the inhabitants. There were about 2,500 people, and they pushed in 12,500 Jews. It was feasible because we had no furniture. There were just some straw on the floor with some blankets, and that was our ghetto. It was fenced in, and it was patrolled by Hungarian gendarmes and German soldiers. We tried to establish a semblance of normal life. We had a synagogue, we had a hospital, we had a butcher, baker, and so on. But even that didn't last long. One morning, again Hungarian gendarme, German soldier came, pick up your belongings, and they took us again to a railroad siding, where an engine with cattle cars. I don't know, hope you know what the cattle car is, but I'll show it to you later. Even the opening of the cattle cars were covered. They pushed in 60-65 persons into each of these cars, and they gave us two pails, one full with water, the other one was empty. They locked these cars, and the train started. We had no idea where we are going. I don't have to tell you, the pail with the water got emptied very quickly, and the empty pail got filled up just as fast. The journey lasted about 2.5 days. We arrived, it was quiet, and then at daybreak, they opened these cattle cars. And we faced a bunch of German soldiers. They came with dogs. They started screaming, get out fast, fast, fast. The dogs were barking. Oh, leave your belongings there. We are going to take it after you. The place where we arrived was Auschwitz. Auschwitz was the largest concentration camp. More than 1.5 million people were killed there. When we arrived, we had no idea where we are, but what they did, they separated the men from the women. And 5 abreast, we were going to the end of the platform. There was a table, what was that big? Few SS officers stood in front of it. One of them in the middle even had a white coat. And as you approached the table, he looked at you and waved either right or left. We had no idea what it meant. But we found out later that he was simply deciding whether you are able to work or not. Anybody who was able to work was sent on one side, and the other ones, like children, old people, invalids, were sent to the other side. Or they took them to a place where they are going to take a shower. They told them, get undressed, make sure you know where your clothes are. And they went into the shower room. But except gas came from the shower head instead of water. And they were killed right there. Unfortunately, but I found out only after the war that my mother and my sister were amongst them. You see, my sister was only 13 years old, too small. And my mother, who spoke fluent German, asked the officer, "Can I go with my daughter?" And she said, "Okay." But I say I found this out only after the war. They were also, I don't even like to use the word cremation because that's too fine. They were burnt that night. My father and I were sent into the other side where we had to get undressed. We walked around naked for a while and then they shaved us from top to bottom. And eventually they gave us a striped kind of prison uniform. Again, we slept outside. And next midday, finally they gave us something to eat. You know, by then we haven't eaten for about 36 hours. They gave a big bowl of vegetable soup, big vegetable soup. One bowl for 6 men. But they wouldn't give us a spoon because they said, "You are not really human beings, you are like dogs, you are going to eat like dogs." And you know something? We did. I remember the following day I was talking to my father and I thought, what else can they take away from us? They took away our country because we always felt we are Hungarians. They took away our home, business, took away our family, took away the shirt off our back, and took away our dignity by forcing us to eat like dogs. I was wrong. Then they took away my name. From then on I became 78,847. I didn't stay here long because a couple of days later they were looking for tradespeople. Now, I don't have to tell you that after I graduated from high school, as a Jew, I couldn't go to university. So I learned a trade. I became an electrician. My father said, maybe go, maybe they treat tradesmen a little bit better. So I went. They grabbed me again, put me in a cattle car, and took away by train. About 5 hours later, I arrived to Warsaw, the capital of Poland. Now, let's go back a little bit. The war started by the Germans invading Poland. That was in 1939. By 40-41, they started to establish ghettos, which meant they took the Jewish population, they crammed them into small places, 10, 12 in each room, and they were starving there, and there were epidemics, and so on. In Warsaw, there were 350,000 men and women and children were crammed into the ghetto. And they told them, if you work, you'll get a little more food. So people reported. They took them away. But somehow, these people never came back. First they thought that, well, they remained there where they work and so on. Then they found out that after a few months' work, they were taken to one of the other concentration camps, Treblinka. They gassed them and burned them. So out of desperation, in 1943, they revolted. They fought the Germans for over 3 weeks. And the only way the Germans could defeat them, then they simply blasted one house after the other. Now, let me show you something. That looks like Hiroshima. That was the Warsaw Ghetto after the uprising. Now, the Germans established a concentration camp there to clean the rubble, clean the bricks. We piled them up into 150, and the local population bought cheap building material. They didn't care where it came from. And that was the camp I was taken to. But that was already in 1944. By 1944, the Germans were retreating. As a matter of fact, the Soviet army was so close that at night we heard the guns. So we hoped we'll be liberated shortly. But it didn't take a turn that way. You see, the defeated Polish army wanted to have the Russians, and they started an uprising within the city. They started to fight the Germans. But Stalin didn't want them to liberate Warsaw. He wanted to liberate Warsaw, so he kept the Soviet troops on the other side until the Germans defeated these Poles. Actually, out of the 30,000, 50,000 were killed. And then, for good measure, the Germans killed another 90,000 of Poles. This time, not Jews. They were all Catholics. During that time, unfortunately, they had a chance and time to evacuate our camp. So they started marching us west. Chronologically, that was the first so-called death march of the Holocaust. We started out 4,200 men, and less than 2,000 arrived to the latest destination, which was Dachau. I don't know if you ever heard of Dachau. Now, Dachau was the very first concentration camp Hitler established. The minute he came to power, anybody whom he thought is against his regime would take him. Naturally started with the communists, the socialists, unionists, some habitual criminals, and homosexuals. He didn't like homosexuals. But that was in 1933. Naturally, among these were a lot of Jews. 11 years later, 1944, Dachau became a kind of distribution center. You see, during the war, all German men were in the army. So their whole economy depended inmates of the concentration camps and the POWs of the Soviet Union. There were about 3.5 million Soviet prisoners were inside Germany and were. I was sent from there in a small camp that they just started. I call it Hitler's last foray. You see, by that time, everybody knew Germany lost the war. But Hitler still had his ideas. And what he wanted, to build 7 huge so-called super bunkers. Now, when I say super bunkers, they were supposed to be 7 stories high and the size of 4 football fields. Now, this little camp where I was sent was established to build one of these super bunkers. Now, why I say it's Hitler's foray, because it would have taken 2, 3, maybe 5 years to complete it, because it was supposed to be covered with vegetation so the airplanes couldn't see it. And they were supposed to have, by then they knew something about jets and missiles. They were supposed to be manufactured there. Our job was to carry the sacks of cement up to the machines. Now, especially during the winter, it was slippery, and if someone fell into the wet cement, we weren't allowed to save him. Now let me give you an idea what it meant. Well, let me just finish this. We worked 12 hours in 2 shifts in this. But when you went home or back to the camp, it was the so-called roll call. They were always counting. The Germans were always counting. All the people were dying there daily, so the dead bodies had to be lined up in the front. And sometimes if they didn't tarry, we had to stand there for hours. But while we were standing there, the SS was coming around and looked at you. And if they saw you that you don't look too healthy or too strong, they pulled you out, they sent you back to Dachau, where they starved you to death, and then they cremated you. If they wanted to do it faster, some of them were sent back all the way to Auschwitz, to the gas chambers, because that was a quicker way to get rid of them. By the way, they also had a number for each concentration camp. How many days on the average is supposed to survive? This camp was 80 days. I was in another one which had only 60 days. I just want to show you this. At the end of the war, the US Army blew up that bunker. They put 120 tons of TNT, and all it happened went up and came down in one piece. Now, this was home away from home. We lived in these huts. Actually, half of it is underground because it was cheaper to heat it in the winter. 16 of us, 2 layers, and 1 stove. That was the furniture. And that was all. Any guesses? Shower. No, there was no such thing as a shower. This was our bathroom, which was in the summer was okay, but in the winter a little bit drafty. Now, as you notice, there is no water and no paper there. You mentioned shower. There was no such a thing as a shower. I did not take 1 shower during the whole year. There were a couple of faucets with cold water. You could wash your face if you weren't too cold. So naturally, we were full with lice pretty soon. And that also, from the typhus, some people were killed there. Now, this looks like a small metal pole. I called it the lifeline, because we each had this bowl, and there where we got our food. Now, if you lost it, you had to wait until someone else finished their soup, and sometimes nothing left. As you notice, there's a piece of wire because we always had it on our belt, and at night we had it under our head. Now, as I mentioned, we worked 12 hours, 6.5 days. It was hard work. If you weren't fast enough, they beat you. They also told you every day, practically, that whatever happens, we are going to kill you. But the worst thing was the hunger, starvation. You see, I got a small book which was written about this camp. That's where I got all these pictures. And they get the statistics. You see, at the beginning we got about 1/3 of a bread. But later, that bread was reduced to 250 grams, which was a thick, that included some sawdust too. The food was, well, the wake-up call was at 4:15 in the morning. And in the morning, we got so-called breakfast, which was, they called it coffee, but never saw any coffee beans. And then we went to work. At noon, we had a half a liter of this. There was always the same soup. Little variations where there were more turnips or more carrots or something, but that was it. We got a half a liter, and for evening, we got a whole liter. Once a week, we got a small piece of margarine or a dab of marmalade. Oh, once in a while they even give us 5 cigarettes. And there was an exchange rate, a half a portion of bread for the 5 cigarettes. And there were people who gave away half of their bread for the 5 cigarettes. I don't have to tell you, they are not around to tell their stories. The free afternoon, after 6.5 year work, we had to stand in line and we were ashamed. We also got a haircut. And the haircut was with clippers, but in the middle there was a kind of a strip, a finer clipper. It looked like an inverted mohawk haircut, for the reason that we shouldn't escape. Now, it was superfluous because we were in the middle of Germany, where there was a law, if you help a Jew, you got shot. Maybe your family were killed too. So, but that's the way they were. So, pretty soon, that's the way we looked. The average weight was between 65 and 75 pounds. Now, as I said, we didn't have a shower. That striped uniform I got in Auschwitz, I had it on, I worked in it, I slept in it, there was no change. I changed my underwear 3 times in 1 year. As I mentioned, we were full with lice, so instead of giving us a chance to take a bath, they always disinfected us. Which didn't mean anything, because you put back the same clothes, again, the lice were there. Well, that was the life in this camp. One day, mid-morning, they called us back from the workplace, put us again into a train. And the train started to go toward Austria. After 2 days, it stopped and turned back west. When it stopped, we realized we had no more guards. So we opened the cattle cars and we saw the first American troops going by on the road in their trucks. They didn't stop, they just looked at us, because that's the way we looked, all of us. As you notice, there is a small can. They threw us some cans with some food. We opened it up. There was a few crackers, small piece of cheese. There was a small bag with the yellow powder. I tasted, burnt my tongue. I just threw it out. It was powder to make lemonade. And there was something which looked like a bandit. I just threw it out. Later on, I found out later on that that would have been my first encounter with Western civilization. It was chewing gum. By the way, the reason they took us in this train, because they wanted to keep their promise. They wanted to take this train into some abandoned mines, simply blow up the opening. There are 5,000 Jews, very cheap, efficient way of killing them. But the Soviet army got there first, so they turned back, and then by then the guards realized that it would be better to be prisoners of United States than the Soviet Union. Later on that day, some other troops came, and they took us into a university campus. Now, one of Hitler's policy was that he indoctrinated the German children from, I think, the age of 7 or 8 or so on, and kept them away from the families, to the point where they were told, if you hear that your parents are talking against the regime, you're supposed to report it. And it happened that children reported against their parents. That's the way they were indoctrinated. Anyway, it's a beautiful campus, and they opened the dining room. And for the first time, I realized that I'm sitting on a chair, first time in a year. I have a table in the front of me. I had a dish, I had cutlery, and they gave us supper, white bread and cream of wheat. So naturally, wolfed it down and ran to the end of the line for the second or maybe the third portions until they realized, oh, and they closed the dining room. But what they didn't realize, neither did we, that was too rich for our stomach. We all got sick. Over 300 of us died. I was in bed for about 8 days. But I started to get by strength. And I was in this camp for more than 4 months. I don't know to tell you, my main occupation in this camp was eating. I gained 40 pounds. And by September, that was me. Any resemblance? No. Now, I was liberated only the last week of the war, at the end of April. But, as I mentioned before, most of the camps were in Poland. And the Soviet army came to Poland from 1944 on. So all these camps were liberated much earlier. Auschwitz was liberated January 27th, I think. Now, any survivor, what can they do? The only logical thing was, go back to your hometown and see who else survived from the family. And they did. Now, there was no welcoming committee for the returning Jews. You see what happened? They all believed Hitler's promise that I'm going to kill all the Jews. Don't worry about it. So they gave away our homes, gave away our businesses, whatever we had. So whoever returned saw another family sitting in their home. And, hey, this is my home. Sorry, we got it from the government. So that was the general situation. So those, especially, who didn't find any family members, any survivors, they got out. And everybody tried to go back to Germany. It was occupied by four powers then, and everybody tried to get into the United States territory because they had the best food. Somebody from my hometown came to this camp where I was, and he says, "What are you doing here? Your father's at home." So, if my father's at home, let's go home. It took me about 3 weeks until I got home. There was no train service or anything. And yes, my father survived. He was 54 years old. He was the oldest survivor of the community. The youngest was 14. And out of the 1,100 Jews, 154 came back, less than 15%. I looked around and I told my father, "Let's get out of here." He said, "No, I'm too old. I'm too weak to start a new life." So I remained with him until he found a widow, got remarried, and then I said goodbye to him and I left Hungary. I went back to Germany, again, the US occupied territory. Now, you see, while I was in the camp, I knew nothing. All I knew, who was working next to me, who was sleeping next to me, I had no idea the magnitude of the Holocaust. I had no idea that 6 million people were killed. 1.5 million people, 1.5 billion children. So I hated the whole world. I hated the Germans, the Hungarians, Lithuanians, Ukrainians, for what they did to us, for the atrocities. I just want to mention that the Germans recruited other nationalities into the SS. And most of the SS guards were not really Germans. They were all these mother countries. So naturally, I hated them. But I hated the rest of the world for what they did not do for us. You see, in 1938, before the war started, there was a 32 countries were called into a conference by Roosevelt, the US president, and it was in Evian where the water coming from. And they said, "Look, Hitler doesn't want any Jews. How many Jews are you going to take in?" It was a resounding silence. Not Canada, not even the United States, who called the conference, not Australia, not the South America. They didn't want the Jews. So Hitler said, "Well, then I have another solution." And he called it the final solution. We're going to kill them. And he almost managed it. I desperately wanted to get out of Europe, because by then we were afraid of the communists. You see, Hungary was taken over by the communists. And I went to different consulates and I said, "I would like to get a visa." He said, "What are you?" "I'm a Jew." "A what?" I said, "I'm a Jew." "There are no countries, there is no allocation for Jews." "Where were you born?" I said, "I was born in Hungary." "Then go back to Hungary and apply as a Hungarian. We have a quota for Hungarians." I said, "Look, once they threw me out, second time I escaped, I can't go back to Hungary." Anyway, it took me 2 years until I was able to come to Canada. By then the Canadian government allowed 1,000 youngsters to come in. As I said, I hated the whole world. But time heals things? No. Soothes things, maybe. Then I realized that surviving the Holocaust is a gift. A gift which came with two obligations. One, to ensure the continuity of the Jewish people. So I got married, I have 2 children, 6 grandchildren, that job is finished. The other is not to let the world to forget the Holocaust. And that's why I'm here talking to you. You see, I hope that people learn something about the Holocaust and even the Second World War. The Second World War was the first war where more civilians were killed than soldiers. And it will be, I hoped it will be peace. But I was wrong. Pretty soon, genocide started all parts of the world, Asia, Europe, Africa. You see, there was a saying, if you don't learn from history, you're bound to repeat it. That's exactly what happened. So I was very disappointed in my generation and the next generation. And I hope maybe your generation will be smart enough to realize. Well, prejudice is almost an instinct. Different color, different eyes, different religion, not one of us. But that can turn into hate, and hate very easily turns into genocide. So it's up to you, new generation, to change the world what we have now and make it a better one, a peaceful one. Now, basically, this is my story, and I am always open for questions. And I warn you, if there are no questions, I speak more. So, any question? Yeah.
It's not so much a question, it's something I think I asked last year, and you brought up a detail that I found interesting. This had to do with family members sharing what little food there was.
Oh, yeah. Okay. You know, your instinct is families. Let's be together. And you know, I think the reason why my father and I survived, because we were separated. You see, you suffer. You are hungry. But if you see someone you love is suffering too, it hurts you. Now there is another point. You see, you have a piece of bread. Your father or your brother doesn't have any. Are you going to give half of it or not? If you give half of it, both of you might die. If you don't give, how can you live seeing one of your family members die? So, being alone, it worked. I was also 20 years old. I wasn't a kid anymore, that much dependent on the family, and I didn't have my own family. So whatever happened to me, it was only me, and me. During this year, I don't remember thinking. When I was thinking how long will be until the next year. We were like zombies. And at one time I thought maybe they put some dope in our food. They didn't have to. Because research later proved that if you are starving, your brain slows down completely. Still no question.
So you mentioned your high school sweetheart in the beginning.
Yeah. She's in Israel. She has 4 children, 13 grandchildren, and 5 great-grandchildren. And I visit her every year. Pardon?
You still hate the world?
I hate it.
You said you hated the world, like
Yeah.
for not doing anything.
Yeah.
You still do it?
Well, I stopped hating because I want to be better than that. But I can't forgive. I have 6 million reasons not to forgive. Now, let me tell you another thing. When I finally came to Canada, I was disappointed. I realized I came to a country where anti-Semitism exists. I left Europe, wanted to get away from it. You know, when I first time I went up to Syndicat, I mentioned there was still a sign in the front of the hotel, no Jews or dogs allowed. You know that the Devoir held a poll not much after the war. Which immigrants you don't want to see here? The number 1 was the Japanese. But the number 2 were the Jews before the Germans, whom they fought just a few years before. Now, the difference is that Canada developed into one of the best countries in the world, whereas those other countries in Europe remained what they were before. Yeah?
How were you treated by the Jewish community when you came?
I was lucky. You know why? I had no relatives here. Now, what I mean is, actually, let me tell you a little story. I was part of a panel discussion. There were 3 women and I was the 4th one. And they asked about what happened when you came to Canada. Well, one had an uncle, so naturally the uncle took them in. But it was a small apartment, so she had to sleep in the living room, which wasn't a very comfortable thing. The other family, there was a similar age girl, same teenager, so there was a clash of personalities. The 3rd family, the uncle was okay, but his wife wasn't happy that to feed another person and have another thing. I was lucky I had no relatives, and I was assigned to a family who volunteered to take in these newcomers, and they were fantastic. I still remember the lady sat with me every breakfast and talked to me. She said, you might be interested what I'm telling you, but you're learning English. And they were really a family. You see, we had no family. Our friends, those who came together, we were our families. Also, let's face it, we came from nowhere. No background, no nothing. So when we started to date a girl, the family looked at a little bit worried about it. Also, when we arrived, they brought in a psychologist from New York who gave us IQ tests and looked at us and everything. And the final judgment was, they'll never make it. It so happened, about 25 years later, I was talking to a group of kids, and one of the kids came to me and says, you know, my grandfather was involved somehow, I forgot what's his name. He says, Dr. I said, yeah, thank you very much.
Unbelievable.
Actually, I wanted to phone him up, but he died. Okay, no, I forgot if you have no questions. Let me read you this. In Germany, they came for the communists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for trade unionists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Catholics. I didn't speak up because I was a Protestant. Then they came for me. And by that time, no one was left to speak up. His name is Pastor Martin Neumeller. He was taken to Dachau, but he survived. He died only in 1984. Let me read you a poem. It was written by a 10-year-old boy. At my birth, I was 8 pounds. At his birth, he almost died. When I turned 1, my parents loved me. When he turned 1, his parents were taken away. When I turned 2, my parents carried me all over the house. When he turned 2, he was chased by the Nazis. When I turned 3, I went to bed without a fuss. When he turned 3, he wished he had a bed. When I turned 4, I got a tricycle. When he turned 4, he got a tattoo with numbers. When I turned 5, I ate chocolate. When he turned 5, he ate that. When I turned 6, I broke my shoulder. When he turned 6, the Nazis broke his spirit. When I turned 7, I dreamed about heaven. He never turned 7. His soul went up to heaven. 10-year-old boy. Still no questions, eh? Then I'm going home.
I think the questions are probably going to come like 3 hours later.
Yeah, but
The delayed reaction.
usually they catch me at the corridor. It's amazing. Now, I can tell you one thing. If you want to learn something about the Holocaust, there is a Holocaust museum here. And spend an hour or an hour and a half there, you learn more about it than you would learn by reading books or seeing movies. It's a fantastic place.
That's in the Cummings building?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's just about 3 or 4 subway stops away from here.
Yeah. It is, and they have excellent guides. And well, not with you, but after we visit the museum, one of the survivors talked to them like I speak to you now. Yeah.
So when you were at the concentration camp, did you ever think you would survive, or did you like lose hope at one point?
Yes. Well, you see, if you give up, you didn't last a day. Actually, we just tried to survive until the next meal. It went on day after day.